Snow slammed against the windshield in a frenzy, a relentless white veil blurring everything ahead. Rachel leaned forward, eyes strained, wipers squeaking uselessly as they swiped across the frozen glass. Her fingers curled tightly around the steering wheel, joints aching, the white of her knuckles glowing under the dashboard lights. The world outside was a blur of motion. Trees bending, snow whipping, wind screaming. She was halfway through the winding road that led out of town, headlights carving narrow tunnels through the darkness. 12 hours on her feet, no brakes, just patience, fluorescent lights, and the constant mechanical beeping of machines in the ICU. Her ears still rang with it. But this storm was louder and colder. She exhaled slowly, not just to calm her nerves, but to feel something. Anything. Fatigue clung to her bones like wet clothes. It wasn't just the shift, it was everything, the kind of tiredness that doesn't lift after sleep. Her father's funeral had been 10 days ago, but the ache hadn't softened. It had only grown quieter, deeper, more permanent. Nights blurred into one another, filled with aimless scrolling, half-eaten meals, and hollow silences. She hadn't cried, not once. Not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. Grief was supposed to break you open. Instead, it had sealed her shut. Every curve of the road whispered of something lost. The diner on 5th, where he used to wait with 2 cups of coffee. The church steeple where his voice once echoed during Christmas services. The hardware store with that rusty bell he hated but never replaced. Now, every building, every street lamp, ghosts. She'd come back to settle the estate, but all she'd done was float through a house that still smelled like his cologne and stare at his empty chair. The town hadn't changed, but without him, it felt like a stranger. The car's heater hummed low, casting a soft warmth against her legs and fingers. The dashboard lit her face in pale blues and oranges, a mechanical comfort against the chaos outside. But inside her chest, everything was still frozen. A numb, brittle kind of cold that no thermostat could fix. She pressed her hand to her heart for a moment, half hoping for a jolt, a crack, some sign of thaw. Nothing. Just the same dull ache wrapped in silence. Then, movement, just a flicker. A shadow against the blizzard, swift and low to the ground. Her breath hitched. The car jolted slightly as she instinctively tapped the brakes. "What was that?" she muttered, peering into the storm. It could have been anything, a deer, a branch, her mind playing tricks in the snow's hypnotic dance. But her pulse didn't lie. It had seen something, felt something, a warning, or a whisper. Rachel slowed, eyes narrowed, breath fogging the windshield as she leaned forward. Snow spiraled like ghosts in her high beams. She scanned the white blur, waiting for something, anything to reappear. Seconds passed, then a minute. Stillness. She shook her head, as if shaking loose the thought. "You're tired, you're seeing things." Her grip returned to the wheel, firm, and she pressed on. The tires crunched through the snow, carving tracks into the cold. But a sliver of doubt slid into her thoughts. The wind picked up again, this time wilder, almost angry. It howled through the trees behind her, rattling branches like bones, screaming through the cracks in her windows. She glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness and snow. But it felt alive. Like the storm itself had a voice, a plea. Turn back. Rachel shook her head and faced forward. But something deep in her chest, a whisper beneath the grief, told her that this storm wasn't finished with her yet. And somewhere behind her, something waited. The wind slapped against Rachel's coat as she stepped onto the porch, mug of tea in hand, expecting silence and solitude. But the pristine layer of snow that blanketed her yard was interrupted. Deep impressions trailed from the woods and curved toward her house. Her breath caught. The prints were unmistakable, canine, heavy and erratic, as though the animal had stumbled. She bent down, running a gloved finger along the edge of one. Still fresh, maybe minutes old. She glanced toward the trees, her chest tightening. No sound, no movement. Only the whisper of the wind through the pine branches and those haunting tracks, leading directly to her door. Something, or someone, was out there, and it was close. Rachel froze. The sound was barely more than a breath, fragile and frayed, like the final thread of something unraveling. It came again, a broken, pleading whimper that didn't belong to any wild animal she knew. Not a fox, not a coyote. This was desperate. She turned slowly toward the source, heart pounding louder than the wind. Her eyes scanned the shadows along the porch, then down the steps, past the hedges. There, just beyond the railing, half lost in drifting snow, something shifted. The whimper pierced the stillness again, more insistent this time. Rachel's hands tightened around her mug. She took a single step forward, the crunch of her boots loud in the hush. "Hello?" she whispered. She pulled the storm door open, hinges creaking in protest. The cold surged in, biting at her skin, and then she saw him. A German shepherd lay slumped against the siding, his body curled tightly, half covered in snow. Frost clung to his whiskers and lashes. His ears didn't lift. One eye opened, dull, cloudy, but fixed on her with a quiet knowing. Rachel dropped to her knees, not caring about the cold soaking through her jeans. Oh, God! His sides barely moved. His breaths came shallow and slow, the kind that lived on the edge of nothing. She reached out, tentative, her hand hovering over his fur. It was ice cold. And yet, his eyes never left hers. He was waiting. As she leaned closer, her breath caught at the sight of his ribs, jagged and sharp under thin skin. He had the look of something worn down, as if hunger had been his only companion for weeks. When he shifted slightly, his front paw slid forward, and with it, a streak of red painted the snow. Rachel recoiled, not in fear, but in heartbreak. Blood. She pulled her sleeve down and gently dabbed at the paw. His body didn't flinch. Those hollow eyes, they didn't beg, they just watched, with a strange mixture of surrender and hope. Something inside her cracked. This wasn't just a stray. This was a survivor on the edge of giving up. Rachel sat back on her heels, the cold seeping into her bones. But the chill inside her had a different source. Memories came uninvited. A sun-drenched field, a black Labrador named Max, a laugh caught in the wind. And then, the hospital room, the vet's gentle shake of the head, the silence afterward. She hadn't allowed herself to get close to another dog since. Couldn't risk it. Now, here he was, another soul on the brink. Her heart screamed to act, but grief's shadow clung to her shoulders, whispering caution. Not again, it warned. Don't open that door. She bit her lip, trembling. Rachel stood slowly, torn in half. Her gaze lingered on the dog. His eyes closed now, as if the fight was leaving him. A part of her wanted to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen, to let this be nature's course, cruel as it was. But then there was the other part, the louder part, the one that remembered warm fur beneath her fingers, loyalty without condition, and the way a dog could fill the silence in a person's soul. That part wouldn't let her walk away. She cursed under her breath. Why now? Why this dog? Why does this hurt so much? She moved mechanically, heart thudding, steps heavy with indecision. From the hall closet came an old blanket, the kind you save but never use. From the pantry, a can of chicken soup, poured into a bowl and set by the door, steam curling upward. She placed the blanket on the step beside him, close enough to touch but not too close. And then she opened the door just enough for light to spill out. A silent offer, a fragile invitation. "I'm not promising anything," she whispered. But part of her already had. The minutes ticked by. Rachel watched from the window, arms folded tightly around herself. The food remained untouched. The dog didn't stir. Only his eyes followed her, soft, unreadable, and impossibly still. She couldn't tell if it was fear or trust or something deeper. The silence stretched between them, strange and powerful. Not a single sound, not a single motion, yet it felt like the beginning of something unspoken. Darkness blanketed the woods, and the snow thickened, erasing edges and footprints alike. Still, he didn't leave. Rachel pressed her forehead to the glass, watching his motionless frame, half hidden in white. He had made his choice. Now she had to make hers. She took a deep breath, gripped the cold handle, and lifted. The garage door groaned upward. "Come on," she whispered. He looked up, slowly. Then, without a sound, began to crawl forward. Rachel leaves the garage door slightly ajar, and through a thin crack she watches Shadow. His sleek, black form huddles near the food she had set down for him, eyes darting around with wariness. He hasn't touched the meal since she placed it there an hour ago, but now, as Rachel quietly steps back into the house, she sees him finally take a tentative bite. His movements are slow, cautious, as though he fears someone will appear at any moment to take the food away from him. Rachel's heart tightens, her own unease mirroring his. She knows that trust, if it ever comes, is something that will be earned, not given. Shadow only eats when she's not around, as if his very survival depends on his ability to remain unnoticed. Every day she watches from a distance, holding her breath, wishing he could see she meant no harm. The name Shadow comes to Rachel with a quiet certainty. It's not a name she's chosen out of whimsy. It's a name that calls to her in the stillness of those early mornings when the snow is thick and the world is hushed. Shadow lingers in the corner of her mind like a phantom, both present and elusive. There's something about his quiet nature, the way he fades into the shadows whenever anyone approaches, that makes the name feel like it belongs to him. It's a name that gives him a sense of identity, a fragile thread of connection between them. As she whispers the name to him one chilly morning, she sees his ears twitch ever so slightly. It's as if, for the first time, he's heard it, heard her. Maybe, just maybe, that small, simple word could be the first bridge between them. A quiet routine begins to form between them. Rachel finds herself bringing food to Shadow at sunrise, always at the same time, always in the same place. The days begin to blur as she moves through the motions, food, water, a gentle hand outstretched, but always just out of reach. The first few times, Shadow cowers, retreating to the darkest corner of the yard, but over time, he doesn't flee. He stays. Sometimes they walk together, through the thick snow that blankets everything, the crunch of their footsteps the only sound. Rachel speaks softly, almost to herself, whispering her thoughts as she walks by his side. At first, she wonders why she's speaking at all. Who is there to hear? But somehow, talking to him feels natural, comforting. Her voice feels less empty when it reaches him, even though he doesn't reply. She finds herself sharing things she never intended to share with anyone, not even herself. She tells him about her day, about her worries, about the empty house and the loneliness that seems to cling to her skin. She speaks as if she's forgotten how to talk to a human, but somehow Shadow listens. And it's enough. One afternoon, as they stand near the fence, Rachel sees a neighbor approaching from the distance. Shadow, who has been quiet and calm for days, stiffens. His ears flick, and a low growl rumbles from his chest, sending a ripple of unease through Rachel's body. She freezes, unsure of what to do. The growl deepens into a full-on snarl as the neighbor steps closer. Rachel quickly steps between them, her voice trembling as she calls out to the man, trying to reassure both of them. But it's too late. The damage is done. The trust she had started to build feels fragile now, like a web about to break. Shadow's reaction is a stark reminder of the fear and trauma that still lurks within him. Rachel's heart sinks. She had begun to believe that the worst was behind them, but this moment pulled her back, into a place she had hoped was far gone. She wonders briefly if she's made a mistake, but she can't help but feel that he needs her more than ever. Later that evening, as Rachel carefully brushes the snow off Shadow's fur, she notices something that makes her pause. On his belly, there are deep, jagged scars, some of which are still slightly red and raw. She runs her fingers over them, her breath catching in her throat. There are no words, no explanations. The scars are a story of violence, one that Rachel is not yet ready to read. Her fingers tremble as she traces their edges, each mark a reminder of the suffering Shadow must have endured before he came into her life. Her heart aches for him in a way she didn't expect. She wonders, what kind of life did he have before? And she wonders, too, will he ever let me in enough to know? In an attempt to understand Shadow's past, Rachel decides to take him to the vet. The appointment is quiet and tense, as Shadow growls low when the vet approaches him. Yet, as the examination continues, she discovers something interesting. Shadow has a microchip. Hope surges in Rachel's chest, believing that this could lead to answers. She calls the number tied to the chip, her fingers trembling as she dials. But when she reaches the number, there's nothing but a disconnected tone. No one answers and no information is available. The mystery deepens, leaving Rachel with more questions than answers. Who owned Shadow before? Why was he abandoned? And why had no one come looking for him? The weight of the unknown presses down on her, adding another layer of complexity to their fragile bond. One snowy evening, as Rachel walks Shadow through the frosty landscape, her thoughts begin to wander. She finds herself speaking to him again, but this time it's different. She opens up about her father, a man who was cold, distant, and often cruel. She tells Shadow about the way he would come home drunk, the way his presence would fill the house with a silence that was almost worse than his anger. Rachel's voice trembles as she speaks, her emotions raw and exposed in the cold air. Shadow listens, his head tilting ever so slightly as though trying to understand. He doesn't judge her, doesn't offer advice, he simply listens. It's as if, in that moment, he becomes more than a dog. He becomes a confidant, someone who is there without question, without expectation. And for the first time in a long while, Rachel doesn't feel so alone. As the days pass, Rachel starts to notice something shifting between them. Shadow is becoming more trusting, more dependent on her presence. He follows her around the house, lying near her feet as she works, and he's starting to respond to her calls with a soft wag of his tail. But with every inch of trust that he gives, Rachel feels a wall inside her start to crack. She's terrified. Terrified of getting too close, of feeling too much. Her own emotional walls, built over years of pain and abandonment, begin to crumble, and it frightens her more than she can put into words. What if she opens up and he leaves? What if she lets herself fall in love with him, and then he's gone, just like everything else in her life? The fear lingers, but so does the warmth. Every day she faces the delicate balance between fear and connection. It's a tightrope walk, but it's one she's willing to try. One morning, after a particularly peaceful night, Rachel finds something unusual taped to her front door. A note, written in jagged handwriting. It reads, "He's mine." The message sends a chill down her spine, the words carving a knot of dread in her stomach. The note is simple, but its meaning is anything but. Who wrote it? Why? And more importantly, what do they want with Shadow? Rachel's mind races, her heart pounding in her chest. She wants to ignore it, to push it aside, but she can't. The threat is too real, too immediate. Her bond with Shadow feels more fragile now, like it's been tested in a way she hadn't anticipated. Fear creeps in again, threatening to undo everything they've built. Rachel's paranoia grows as she wonders about the person who left the note. Who were they? Why had they abandoned Shadow? And, more frighteningly, are they watching them now? The fear of losing him becomes overwhelming, and the joy of their connection is now tangled with the looming threat of separation. But despite her growing unease, Rachel knows one thing for certain: she'll fight for him. She'll protect him no matter what. Because, in this quiet, snowy world, Shadow is no longer just a dog, he's family. Rachel's heart hammered in her chest as a loud crash echoed from the window. Her eyes flew open in the dead of night, adrenaline flooding her veins. The room was still, but the silence was quickly shattered by a barrage of furious barking from Shadow. She glanced over at him, his fur standing on end, his eyes wide with a primal intensity. The hairs on her neck prickled, and she instinctively reached for the lamp by the bed, her hands trembling. Shadow wasn't just barking, he was throwing himself at the window, a powerful force of fury and fear. "What is it, boy?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling with confusion and alarm. Shadow's body was a blur of motion as he clawed at the glass, growling and snarling in a way Rachel had never heard before. His protective instincts were in overdrive, and the noise outside, whatever it was, had sent him into a frenzy. Every instinct in her body screamed to do something, but all she could do was watch in frozen fear as Shadow's efforts grew more desperate. Rachel's hands fumbled for the light switch, her mind racing. The room was still cloaked in darkness, and Shadow's snarls were the only sound piercing the air. She could hear the scraping of something, or someone, on the outside, but it was too muffled to make out. With a sudden, shocking force, Shadow lunged toward the window. His massive frame collided with the glass, the violent impact rattling the frame. Rachel gasped, backing away as he pressed his body into the window, teeth bared, claws scraping against the floor in a desperate bid to reach whatever was out there. Through the jagged motion of Shadow's defense, she realized something. There was danger outside. Real danger, and Shadow was willing to fight to protect her. The morning light seeped into the room, casting an eerie glow on the scene before Rachel. She stood at the broken window, her fingers trailing along the edges of the shattered glass, her mind still reeling from the chaos of the night. The whole house felt different, as though the air had shifted, leaving a lingering tension. Shadow lay at her feet, calm now, as though nothing had happened. But Rachel couldn't shake the images from the night before. As she knelt to clean up the shards of glass, her eyes landed on a flyer pinned to the bulletin board nearby. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the name and face of the man, the intruder who had been lurking outside. The flyer was a missing persons notice, but it wasn't just the name that made her blood run cold. The description beneath the photo mentioned his history of animal cruelty. Rachel's hand shook as she held the flyer, her mind racing. The man had been out there for a reason, but why? And what had Shadow been through before he found her? The police arrived in the late morning, their skepticism clear in the way they questioned Rachel. The officer's raised eyebrow said it all. A dog protecting its owner was hardly a rare event. But Rachel didn't back down. She stood firm, despite the strange looks and dismissive remarks. They dusted for fingerprints, took statements, and photographed the broken glass. But their focus quickly shifted as they unearthed a series of troubling details. The man's history, his connection to the area, and the clues that pointed to something much darker than a mere burglary. Something wasn't adding up, and Rachel could feel it. Rachel could hardly breathe as she gathered the documents from Shadow's vet appointment. Her hands trembled as she passed the papers to the officer, his medical records, the microchip tag that had somehow broken during his confrontation with the intruder. She explained that Shadow had been with her for years, had always been her protector, and had never shown signs of aggression before. But the pieces were starting to come together. As she spoke, the weight of the situation settled on her. She wasn't just protecting her dog from an intruder. She was beginning to understand that Shadow was in danger in ways she hadn't yet realized. The vet records showed signs of neglect, signs that could only mean one thing. The more Rachel dug, the worse it got. Late that night, after the police left, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut. She called the local rescue organization, asking for any information they might have on Shadow's past. The answer she got was chilling. Through his microchip and the vet records, they found proof that Shadow had been part of something far darker than she could have ever imagined. Shadow had been used as bait in a dog-fighting ring. Rachel's stomach churned as she heard the full story. He had been beaten, starved, and left to fight for his life, forced into unimaginable circumstances by cruel men who saw him as nothing more than a tool in their sick game. Her mind raced. How could this be the same dog who had protected her with every ounce of his being? The dog who had become her constant companion, her best friend. But no matter how dark his past was, Rachel knew one thing for sure. Shadow wasn't just a survivor, he was a hero. The snow had started to fall gently, covering the world outside in a thick, silent blanket. Inside, Rachel sat beside Shadow on the couch, her arms wrapped around him as she whispered promises through her tears. He rested his head on her lap, his once alert eyes now soft and peaceful. In that moment, she knew she couldn't undo the pain of his past, but she would make sure he'd never face that darkness again. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll keep you safe, always." Shadow responded with a soft sigh, pressing his head closer, as if to say he already knew. Trust, once broken, was now rebuilt, slowly, quietly, and with unwavering love. There were no more words between them. Just silence, the kind of silence that spoke volumes, one where words weren't necessary because the connection was deep and understood. Shadow pressed his head into Rachel's lap, his body warm and solid against her. She stroked his fur, letting the quiet moments between them be enough. In this stillness, there was no past, no pain, just the profound bond between them. A bond built on survival, trust, and love. It was enough. The day of the court hearing arrived with a heaviness that settled in Rachel's chest. The courtroom was cold, clinical, and intimidating. But as she stepped inside with Shadow by her side, the familiar weight of his collar in her hand was the only thing that grounded her. It was more than a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of the fight they were about to face. Rachel squeezed the collar gently, like armor, ready to stand strong for the dog who had saved her more times than she could count. As Rachel took the stand, she felt the full weight of the room settle on her. Her voice trembled, her nerves getting the better of her as she recalled everything Shadow had done for her. But when she spoke, the words came from a place deeper than fear. "Shadow saved me," she said, her voice steady now. "He's not just a dog, he's my family." Her eyes met the jury, her chest swelling with pride as she spoke of the bond they shared, of the healing and the love they had built from the ashes of his past. The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. The judge leaned forward, his gaze softening as Rachel's words hung in the air. He had been skeptical at first, but there was no denying the depth of her connection with Shadow. Rachel's voice broke, but she pushed through. "He saved me too," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the judge. Her heart was laid bare in that moment. In that simple, unspoken truth, the battle was won. Shadow wasn't just an animal in a courtroom. He was a hero, a family member. When the gavel fell, the room held its breath. But Shadow didn't care about the legal victory. His tail wagged softly, his eyes fixed on Rachel. And as she smiled down at him, her heart swelling with relief and love, it was enough. The legal battle was over, but their journey, their bond, would never end. The day Rachel signed the adoption papers, she felt a deep, overwhelming calm that settled in her chest. The paperwork was a mere formality. It didn't matter that the legalities were done. What mattered was the way Shadow had already woven himself into the fabric of her life. In the months since that first night when he was brought to the shelter, she had seen him evolve. No longer the scared, trembling dog who flinched at every sound, Shadow had blossomed into a loyal companion. They had grown together, healing from their shared scars. The moment her pen hit the paper, she understood that the bond they shared couldn't be defined by a signature. It was a bond formed in silence, built through the quiet moments, the healing journey they took side by side. Rachel's new house was nothing extravagant, just a small cottage with a big yard. But for her and Shadow, it was everything. The first day they stepped through the front door, Shadow hesitated, his paws lingering on the threshold as though unsure of what awaited him. Rachel knelt beside him, her fingers gently combing through his fur. "It's our home now, buddy," she whispered. Slowly, Shadow stepped forward, his eyes wide as he explored every corner. The yard was vast, filled with green grass and tall trees that promised endless adventures. For the first time, Shadow seemed to understand the word freedom. He ran circles around the yard, his tail wagging as if the weight of his past was finally lifting. Rachel watched him, her heart swelling with the same newfound sense of peace. It was the beginning of a life they would share, together. Each morning, Rachel and Shadow embarked on their runs together. The cold morning air felt fresh on Rachel's skin as Shadow trotted beside her, the rhythm of his paws mirroring the steady beat of her heart. They ran in perfect sync, a silent understanding between them. Shadow's once cautious steps had turned into confident strides, his fear melting away with each passing day. As the sun began to set, their evening routine was a quiet ritual. Rachel would sit on the couch, her arms wrapped around a blanket, and Shadow would climb onto the cushions beside her, resting his head on her lap. In those moments, there was no need for words. The bond between them was woven deeper with each cuddle, each shared look, each moment of calm. The healing they had both searched for had begun long ago, but now it was undeniable. Rachel's experience with Shadow had given her a new sense of purpose. The pain of her own past, the loneliness she had endured, felt lighter now. Shadow's resilience, his ability to trust again after everything he had been through, had ignited something within her. Inspired by his journey, Rachel started volunteering at the shelter where she had first met him. She spent time with the animals, offering them comfort and compassion. She shared Shadow's story, how he had been rescued from neglect and fear, how he had found a new life with her. Her story resonated with the other volunteers, the families looking to adopt, and especially the animals who needed to believe that they could heal too. Rachel knew that by sharing Shadow's journey, she could offer others the same hope that he had given her. Together, they were making a difference. The change in Shadow was unmistakable. When they first met, he had been skittish around anyone outside of Rachel's small circle, his tail tucked, his body stiff with fear. But now, as they walked through the park, Rachel noticed the subtle difference. When a stranger approached, Shadow's ears perked, his tail giving a hesitant wag before he took a cautious step forward. The transformation wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, like the gentle thawing of ice. It was in the way his posture softened, in how he no longer retreated at the first sign of someone new. For Rachel, it was proof that Shadow had learned to trust again, that he was finally allowing himself to experience joy without fear. Rachel's favorite photo of Shadow and herself hung on the wall above the fireplace. It was a simple picture, taken during one of their evening walks, the fading light casting a warm glow over the two of them. Shadow was sitting at her feet, looking up at her with a soft, trusting expression. She had captured the moment on a whim, but when she looked at it, she saw everything that words could not express. Beneath the picture, she had written a small caption, "Two lost souls who found each other." It was a reminder of how far they had come, of the bond they had built in the face of uncertainty and pain. And every time Rachel stood in front of it, she felt a quiet gratitude settle in her chest. It had snowed again, the flakes drifting down slowly, blanketing the world in a soft, quiet silence. Rachel and Shadow sat together on the porch, their backs leaning against the wooden railing. Shadow, no longer the anxious dog he once was, rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. The world outside might have been cold, but here, in their little home, there was warmth. There was peace. Rachel stroked his fur gently, her heart swelling with love for this dog who had saved her as much as she had saved him. "We made it, Shadow," she whispered, the words carried away by the wind. And as the snow continued to fall, Rachel knew that the two of them, together, had found their place in the world, finally whole. Rachel sat in the quiet of the living room, Shadow's steady breathing the only sound that filled the space. She had been through so much, grief, loneliness, and memories that she had buried deep within her heart. When Shadow had come into her life, she thought she was the one rescuing him from a cold world that had shown him only cruelty. But now she saw it more clearly. Shadow, in his own silent way, had been saving her all along. He had become her anchor in the storm. His presence had brought a sense of calm that she had long forgotten existed. He had taught her that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about finding strength in the unlikeliest of places. And in him, she found the strength to face the darkness within herself. Rachel thought about how broken they both were when they first met. Shadow, lost and terrified, and herself, guarded, afraid to trust anyone ever again. Yet, in that moment of shared pain, they both found the courage to try again. In the beginning, she had wondered if she could love another living creature after everything she had lost. But with each day, the walls she had so carefully built around her heart began to crumble. Trusting him was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it was the best decision she had ever made. Together, they had proven that second chances could heal even the deepest wounds. It wasn't just Shadow who needed healing. As Rachel watched him, his once fearful eyes now full of warmth, she realized something profound. Healing wasn't a one-sided process. She had always believed that she had to fix him, to make him whole. But the truth was, it had been their love, their shared journey, that healed them both. Shadow's loyalty and affection had helped her trust again, and his quiet presence had given her a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. In saving him, she had saved herself. Sitting beside Shadow, Rachel ran her fingers through his fur, a quiet tear slipping down her cheek. He was curled up at her feet, his gentle breathing the sound of tranquility in their home. She whispered softly, "He showed up with no hope, and gave me mine back." It had been a long road, filled with fear and uncertainty, but now, as she looked at the dog who had once been a shadow of himself, she saw the undeniable truth. They were two souls that had found each other when they both needed it the most. And in their bond, they had found something neither of them had expected: healing, love, and the strength to keep going. Rachel, her hand resting gently on Shadow's back, turned toward the camera. "If you're hurting," she said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion, "don't give up. Sometimes the ones who seem broken the most can offer the greatest love, and sometimes saving them means saving yourself." Shadow's tail wagged lazily at her side as if to echo her sentiment. Rachel smiled, the bond between them a silent affirmation of the truth she had come to know. Love and healing come in unexpected forms.